Hey, welcome everybody. Great to have you with us. I'm Rick Hess, Director of Education Policy Studies at AEI. Delighted to have you with us today for this panel conversation, prompted by our new book. I had the privilege of editing it with Michael Horn and Julie Squire, the School Rethink 2.0. We've got a panel today of folks who have contributed to this volume, out now from Harvard Ed Press. And what we want to talk about is some of the opportunities to rethink in ways that will fundamentally alter what happens in schools and classrooms. Um, Look, I know it's been a really slow couple months in education. I know folks have been looking for something to sink their teeth into. All right, not really. But, I think what's neat about this is we've spent so much time over the last couple months talking about politics and education and the Department of Education, our frustration with NAEP scores, that it's easy for a lot of the narrative to get disconnected from some of the really opportunistic, powerful, dynamic stuff that really is happening out across America's schools and classrooms. And we've got with us today four folks who are phenomenally well equipped to talk about this. We've got Larry Berger, CEO of Amplify, Brent Maddin, the Executive Director of the Next Education Workforce at Arizona State, and former provost at the Relay Graduate School of Education. We've got Joel Rose, the co-founder and CEO of New Classroom Innovation Partners, and we've got Arthur VanderVeen, the CEO of New Meridian. Each of these guys is heading up an organization that's been doing just remarkable work of trying to rethink education on the ground. And guys, why don't we start with that? Brent, why don't you kick us off? I'm going to ask each of you guys if you'll just take a couple of moments to talk about what is it that you're helping schools rethink and that you kind of tackled in your contribution to the book. Brent?
Thanks, Rick. Reporting live from chapter 4, where we're rethinking the teacher role, the job of educators. And for the last, I spent a couple of decades rethinking teacher prep and realized that people were peeling out of the profession, maybe because the profession wasn't that fun. That it was designed in some ways, for a previous model of teaching and learning. And so, for the last 7-8 years now at Arizona State University, we have been building what we call the Next Education Workforce, which is helping school systems rethink the way they staff their schools.
That's great. Joel, there's a little bit of relationship there to the work that you guys are doing. Can you talk a bit about what you're helping schools rethink?
Sure, Rick, we're helping schools rethink math education. There have been roughly 600 million Americans that have walked on our soil that spent around 13 years trying to learn math. That's a lot of experience. But today, only about 1 in 4 graduate high school ready for college. There is something wrong here. It's not about a new curriculum or better teacher training. It is about a divorce. And the divorce is between grade levels and math education, because grade levels are sequential based on age, and math is cumulative based on skill. When they conflict, grade levels always win. We want math to win.
So what's, just to give folks a flavor of how you guys are helping schools rethink that, what's that mean?
What it means is if a student walks into, let's say, the 5th grade, the teacher might say, "Welcome to 5th grade. We see there are roughly 212 skills and concepts you still need to learn to be ready for high school. You already know 64 of them. You're going to learn some from a teacher. You're going to learn some from software. You're going to learn some from your classmates. But we're going to meet you where you are and give you a path to get to where you need to be, regardless of whatever the standards say you should know based on your age."
Arthur, I mean, obviously, when Joel puts it that way, assessment kind of comes into a lot of this stuff. You guys have been working hard on this at New Meridian. What are you guys helping schools rethink in terms of assessment?
Yeah, Rick, and I look forward to the ongoing conversation that Joel and I have about these issues. This may seem strange for someone coming from what I do, which is to develop state accountability assessments. We want to clear a space for classroom teachers to be able to focus on deeper learning, critical thinking, deep engagement with content, all those things that generally the state accountability assessment gets in the way of. So we want to rethink the state accountability assessment that supports assessment for learning as a means toward assessment of learning.
And so, what would that mean, just for an instance?
Yeah, one of the biggest things is we think critical design principle is test what's taught when it's taught. Don't wait till the end of the year and have one big kind of end of year assessment that's stressful and distracts from teaching and learning. But chunk up the content throughout the year into small modular assessments and allow teachers to assign those assessments after they've taught that content. Really reduces the stress on the student, provides immediate feedback to what's just been taught in the classroom. And we think it's a fairer measure of student learning. So focus on the classroom use case and then work out the psychometrics to turn all of those assessments into a scaled score for proficiency and mastery of grade level standards.
Larry, Amplify, you guys work with a lot of stuff, but what did you kind of write about in the book, and what specifically are you kind of focused on the rethinking of in this context?
So in this context, it's the rethinking of the textbook and its role in modern education. These days, textbooks are referred to in procurement and policy contexts as core curriculum because people know that it's not just a book, but it is still pretty centrally a book in most cases. And even our tech first company knows that if we want to get broadly adopted, we are shipping a textbook and software that surrounds and supports it. Because there are a lot of good reasons and some bad ones why everyone is committed to this concept of a textbook that has the curriculum for the whole year and lives in a sequence of grade by grade textbooks that are designed for the whole year. And we had to become a pretty big company before we could even consider building one of those because the expense is enormous. And the challenges of distributing them in a market that has been sewed up by a few big publishers for 100 years are immense. And so I wrote about, could we change the procurement, the buying process, how districts and schools and teachers find out about these products, and if we could change that, would that actually make it possible to change what the product itself is?
All right, so let's go a little deeper on the stuff that you guys just sketched. Larry, let's just stay with this for a sec. Um, when you say we need to rethink the textbook, can you give folks kind of an example or a use case of like why it needs to be rethought?
Sure. And again, we often in this start with how are schools buying it today? Because if we don't change how they're buying it, like they've been at this for 100 years, they're good shoppers for the thing they think they are buying. And the question is, could we change that? And so the simple thing is that in a preponderance of districts, the way that they buy a textbook is the teachers. Sometimes it's just some teachers on a committee. Sometimes it's everyone in the district. Sometimes it's whoever happens to wander in, go into a conference room, and they do what's called the flip test. They flip through the pages of the book. And they may do that for 5 minutes or 35 minutes, but certainly they aren't having an experience of teaching with that curriculum real kids. And in some ways that mode of shopping made sense when everything you were considering was a book and you were looking at the pictures in one and who the authors were, and they all started on page 1 and went to page 2000. But as we enter a world where learning can be personalized, where there might be AI tools and support, where there may be efficiency tools that help teachers with grading, et cetera, suddenly the flipping through the book misunderstands the place where all the innovation and all of the improvement of a teacher's life is happening. And so we live in a moment right now where some states and districts have said you can't buy one of these without first piloting it with real kids over weeks and weeks. We like that. But we also live in a place where some quite major states say you are forbidden to do that. That if you did that, that might put you in touch with the publisher who could then corrupt you with bags of cash. And the states that are worried about that are worried because that happened back when it was like my book versus your book. But in this day and age, no one would buy a piece of software without trying it first. And we would argue that it's time for a try before you buy mode of piloting these products so that the kind of innovative tools that you'd never see in the flip test come to the fore in what actually makes teachers like a product. And often it's things that save them time, that make them more powerful, that aren't on the pages of the book. They're behind the scenes automating that teacher's workflow.
And those bags of cash?
We are investing them in building better math curriculum instead of pushing them across the table.
Oh, Joel, so you talked about the need to move from kind of this grade focused math instruction to focusing on the skills pickup. I think the logic of that kind of makes sense, but can you kind of give folks a sense of like where the old model gets in the way of math mastery and
Sure.
how that shift can help?
I'm going to talk about one skill, which is the Pythagorean theorem. Remember, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. We all learned it in middle school. We get data every single day. And so the Pythagorean theorem in our program at least has two predecessor skills. You have to know how to classify triangles, and you have to know how to use exponents. If you know both of those predecessors, you have about a 72% chance of learning the Pythagorean theorem within a couple sessions. If you don't, your chances drop to about 30%. Pretty dramatic. Now, how does schools work? Schools work, well, today is April 1st. The Pythagorean theorem is what we're going to teach because that's next on our scope and sequence in our curriculum, regardless of whether students have the predecessor knowledge or not. And if you don't master the Pythagorean theorem today because you didn't have the predecessor knowledge, you might be in a more difficult place tomorrow when we're using that Pythagorean theorem to learn something else. So also what happens with math education is we're sorting kids out. You fall behind, and there's just no real viable path to ever catch back up. That's why we've got to really begin to separate grade levels from math education.
Arthur, so what is it about kind of these state assessment and accountability approaches that specifically needs to be rethought? Can you give us kind of an illustration of like what it's not able to do that you're trying to help folks do?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it's pretty straightforward in that, we are really over testing in this country in ways that are not supporting learning in the classroom. I was recently in Louisiana talking to instructional leaders at a parish there, and I asked them, they're administering our assessments. And I said, well, what else are you administering? They're doing another commercial interim. They're doing a look for growth measures. They're doing a local assessment for standards mastery. It's a district-wide benchmark assessment. Of course, they're doing screening and progress monitoring for tier 2 students. They're doing the state practice test and then they're doing the state test. All of that within a single district. I mean, it's no wonder that parents are opting out and leaving public schools when all we're trying to what the system is focusing on is a few power standards to get kids on the bubble over the proficiency bar. That's what we've devolved into. We've sapped all the joy out of learning, and we've taken away any space for deeper engagement with content, discovery, exploration. So we think if you can do a few things well that really prioritize a student-centered assessment that's supporting classroom learning in deeper ways, and then do the psychometrics to produce that scale score, you can get rid of a lot of that stuff, the duplication of testing. We want to reduce the duplication of testing. If I could just tee off of a little bit what Joel says, and I imagine Larry would very much agree, given his curriculum background, learning progressions are what's core here. If you're doing assessment for learning, you have to take into context learning progressions. How do students build knowledge? Either in ELA or in math, there's still development of knowledge. And if you're trying to support those learning progressions, you have to be attentive to them. Joel's trying to do this, potentially or often off grade level because that's where students often are. But curriculum programs are also looking at a research-based learning progressions of how students develop knowledge. Our approach is just to align to those high quality research-based curriculum programs with our short modular testlets so that no matter what curriculum program a district is adopting, you can align and test what's taught when it's taught.
So Brent, teaching, I think, you pointed out a lot of folks leave the profession for a lot of frustration. Can you give us kind of a quick glimpse, a window into the kind of stuff that's motivating you?
So I was at a pizzeria or a bar. You decide in DC not that long ago, and voyeuristically listening in on the table beside me, and there was a teacher. It's going to sound like a joke. I swear it's not. There's like a teacher, somebody that worked for, like, I don't know, the Department of Agriculture, and someone from a consulting shop, and they were
And a
talking about
priest.
their life.
There's always got to be a priest.
Yeah, and a priest, which actually maybe makes this point even more salient. And they were talking about basically their lives and the flexibility in their jobs. And like, you get to the teacher, and the teacher's like, yeah, I basically do the same thing every day. Like, I ride the metro to work, I leave. The first day on the job looks like the 3,000th day on the job. If I want to advance, I have to go to administration. None of this actually makes sense if you're building a workforce. You wouldn't ever really build it this way. And so, that's the kind of the teacher side. I think about my own kids, and like the amount of jostling that happens to try to get the right teacher for your right kid, right? And you can't ever get that right. And so the epiphany that we've had, and this is Carol Basile, she's the dean at ASU. People, throw a lot of shade at ed schools. What I'll say is that we're really trying to do something different at ASU. And part of Carol's vision, why she recruited me out of Relay, was to think really differently about how we could design we don't have a teacher shortage problem. We have a workforce design problem, right? And so what we're doing is we're building these teams of teachers wrapping around a shared roster of kids. And Joel, that we've taken inspiration from your work. I mean, Arthur, what you're describing, like if you're going to center on a portrait of a graduate or the obsessed-based, like, we're maybe data rich, but like what we can do with those data, that's really hard to pull off by yourself, right? The amount of variation, all this. So by building teams of teachers, and let me not even say teachers, teams of educators, right, wrapping around shared rosters of kids, suddenly all sorts of new things are possible. We can talk about that later.
So, Brent, let's stay with that. So, talk a bit about how your solution helps. So, what's a new ed workforce school model look like, say, compared to ones that folks with us might be more used to?
Yeah. So, I mean, whether you're in kindergarten or, ninth grade, everything's basically orchestrated around this idea of a teacher in a box with 25 kids, either all day in elementary school or until some like Pavlovian bell rings in high school. And then the kids just rotate. And that's the normative model school. You walk into a next education workforce school, we've got about 150 schools, 50 school systems, 17 states where this work is happening. So it's starting to hit some scale. And let's just sit in third grade for a second. Let's say you got 4 third grade classes. Normally there's 25 kids behind 4 doors, right? And each one of those teachers is responsible for their 25 kids. And hopefully, right, you're not getting like a first year teacher, for the 3rd time in a row as a parent. But that happens. And hopefully as a kid, you like your teacher, and hopefully as a teacher, you like your kids. Goes both ways. And in these models, right, with the next education workforce, you're bringing 100 kids into the middle, and then you're wrapping those 4 teachers plus tutors, community members, like the instructional coaches popping in. And so when you've got Arthur or Larry's data, that's helping you to realize, oh, there might be a different way to meet the needs of all of these kids. Joel, your like roadmaps work, right? Like it's perfect for this, because if we're about meeting the needs of each kid, asking one person to do that by themselves, solamente, like is bananas. And so we build this team of educators. Sometimes the work is way more interdisciplinary. Sometimes, you're popping out. You're only just managing the ratios. Like I think of this as a ratios game all the time. How do you get the right educator with the right kid at the right time, doing the right thing? And a team-based approach, as opposed to one person in one classroom, allows us to do that.
And so for folks trying to picture this who aren't familiar, a little bit more like a team you might see like in a hospital or at a law firm?
Yeah, I'd take both of those. Ed tech, right? Like very rarely do we say, hey, one person's got to be great at all aspects of the job. Like that's like looking for unicorns.
Joel, obviously, as Brent's mentioned, I mean, a lot of this is stuff that you guys have been pioneering with respect to math, but also because of what you've been doing, I think there's also some other elements in addition to the teamwork in terms of the predictive modeling that you alluded to. Can you talk a bit about how the new classrooms model works? Because I think there's some similarities to what Brent described, and then there's some other stuff too. You're still mute, but
Sorry. So what we do with roadmaps is, let's say you're a student in a 7th grade class. We're going to administer a diagnostic to understand what you may still be missing back from 6th grade, 5th grade, 4th grade, and 3rd grade, but only those skills that you actually need for the 7th grade. That we call your roadmap. Think of that as your scope, but not your sequence. Then what we're going to do is when you're in your tier 2 or homework or out of school, we're going to figure out which of those skills on that list do you not yet know and you're ready to learn that relate to what's being taught in your core curriculum. So that way, what students have is they have the high standards in their core curriculum, but they have pathways to get there that's integrated to their core curriculum when they're in their tier 2 supplemental time.
so if I'm listening, I say, well, wait a minute, but it sounds like you're saying they need to learn some stuff from 5th and 6th grade to get on their path, but not all of it. But right now in my school, they have to learn all of it. Isn't it better that they have to learn all of it and kind of walk through 5th grade? What am I not hearing?
Yeah. No, if you're in the 7th grade, there are plenty of things that are on the 5th grade curriculum that you may not know, but you don't need for the 7th grade. If we're trying to figure out what is your acceleration path, if you're already 1, 2, 2+ years behind, we don't have the time to teach you all the 5th grade stuff and then all the 6th grade stuff and then all the 7th grade stuff. It's just a numbers game. So we have to be very strategic in terms of those concepts that we pick. And those need to be ones that relate to the 7th grade and that ones that we're confident you don't already know.
And how do you figure out which ones those are?
Well, that's what our diagnostic is about. So it's an adaptive diagnostic assessment that gets very precise, gets us down to the skill level so we can understand exactly what those skills would be.
But how do you know which ones people need and which ones are less important?
So if we're giving, let's say there is 110 skills, including the grade level and the pre-grade, we know from our own skill map, which are the ones, I think I misunderstood your question. We know from our own skill map, which are the pre-grade skills that relate to 7th grade. We've done all the analysis for 10 years to refine our understanding of what applies and what doesn't. You don't need to know how to tell time in order to work on quadratics, for example. They're just completely different parts of math. Once we know that, we can then assess within that to understand what each student knows and what they don't know.
That's great. Larry, so what does when you talk about rethinking the textbook, is it mostly procurement or is the actual textbook itself getting rethought too?
It's a quite fundamental rethinking of the textbook, but and the reason why we keep connecting it to procurement is just until the demand side changes a very ritualized way of buying a particular good, it's harder for people to notice the kind of thing that Joel works on, the kind of thing that I work on, because they're looking for a glossy book with a shiny cover, and the power in the experience is elsewhere. But yes, it is. I guess what I would say is we are always trying to deliver on something that is kind of the same, meaning if you are a teacher who is cautious about stepping out of your comfort zone, there's a textbook, there's problem sets, there's practice for the kids to do, there's ways of assigning homework, etc. But if you are a teacher who is ready to be more adventurous, everything about the pedagogy shifts. And I would say the main thing that shifts is the learning experience is happening in the classroom as a set of social interactions among teachers, kids, and the mathematics that is being managed with the support of software so that it no longer requires superheroic teachers who can know where every single kid in the class is and meet them with exactly what they need. But instead, the teacher is helped in presenting math experiences that get kids very engaged, is helped in interpreting what kind of work is my class doing? Are there some patterns? Does most of the class get it? Does most of the class not get it? If I were to group kids, what would those groups be? And then manages things like the assigning of the homework, the giving feedback on the homework, the extracting from all of these interactions a data set that enables you to do some of the kinds of work that Arthur and Joel have been talking about, where you can map where are kids in terms of a set of mathematical proficiencies, not because you tested them, but because they've been working in your medium for day in and day out for weeks and months. And so you've learned a lot about how they approach math, what they are getting right and wrong, and what assets they bring to the next lesson. But all of that rethinking is possible in the current state of the art, and is not quite what most states are set up to buy.
Well, I mean, for folks who are watching, I mean, it seems like, I mean, that's a fundamental redefinition of what we mean by textbook. I mean, textbook is an extension of a learning management system, and like, is that right?
I think so. I mean, in some ways, in every profession, at some point, people start building the tools that enable the professionals to do their work better. And at first, like, we all watched our doctor fiddle with the new patient chart thing, and they were looking down at the screen the whole time, and suddenly our medical interaction got a lot worse. And I think in a lot of fields, we're still somewhere in that place where the technology is enabling some new things, the electronic medical health record, but is making certain parts of the human interaction worse. I think education went through, a phase of that we're finally emerging from, where the tools are saving teachers time. They are making teachers feel more powerful. They can reach more kids in more ways, and they can help deepen the teacher's understanding of what does each kid need, and where are they. But yes, that is what happens when great software meets the workflow of a professional who lives a complex life. And we think that building that software and great curriculum is what every teacher is asking for, and we haven't yet. It has often been a problem that the technology tools are over here, and then the curriculum the teachers spend all their time in is over here, and it's time for them to start to merge into one experience.
I mean, Arthur, I mean, as you noted a moment ago, I mean, one of the parental and teacher frustrations is the amount of time devoted to testing and assessment. So how do you guys actually help with this? So how does the New Meridian approach start to get us both kind of some of that agility you talked about in terms of useful data, and shifting away from so many assessments?
Yeah.
How's that work?
Yeah. I think the vision that Larry just laid out is this coming together. Students are demonstrating growing mastery in many ways in a classroom throughout the year. Tasks, assignments, teacher observations, this more kind of organic, tacit understanding of how students are developing and progressing towards standards mastery throughout the year. It's been a vision for a couple of decades at least now. Can we just leverage all of that information to get toward more kind of reliable, comparable measures of outcomes for a variety of purposes, including accountability purposes? We're laboring in that same vein, trying to kind of leverage that more organic information toward something that can be used for kind of standard measures of growth, proficiency, those learning outcomes. We're coming at it not quite as organically, I think, as Larry and Joel are, because we're coming at it from the state accountability perspective, which still has pretty high bar as long as Don Peasley continues to be employed at U.S. Department of Ed, in terms of peer review and technical requirements for comparability and reliability. So we're inserting these testlets in ways that they're closer to instruction. They're delivering feedback almost immediately, but together they have to cover the state standards. We don't currently reach back into prior grades, though we've explored possibilities of partnering with Joel on how those two could work together, for example. But we embed into the taught instruction and then realize that reliable, comparable measure.
So, for somebody like me who's like arm's length from like assessment, like it all starts to sound like a lot of really like jargon, smart jargon. Like, what's an example of like one question that you guys are asking differently, or one specific kind of element of it that those of us who aren't in the mix can go, oh, I get that.
Hmm. We've always, and we've been in this for 9 years, we've always put a focus on uh, use of more performance tasks to get at more holistic critical thinking, problem solving, researching. In science, of course, we're phenomenon based where students have to investigate and synthesize knowledge to support a hypothesis. We do that in math with mathematical modeling of certain events. We want to get to those more critical
So to do that
thinking.
in science, does that mean students are conducting experiments during the assessment, or what does that mean?
Well, this is, and again, we're within controlled, standardized environments. So these are not classroom projects, but the technology is getting to where you can, simulate or structure tasks using tools within the software that you can then measure kind of student responses or engagement in a more holistic way.
So Arthur, so let's, so to give us a sense, like rubber meets road, you guys are really getting traction doing this in a state. How does that look different from what folks are maybe used to? How does this work better?
Yeah, one of the major ways it looks different is that at the beginning of the year, every district or even school basically sits down the curriculum director and the assessment director, and they build their state test. So they will look at what their curriculum program is or what their local scope and sequence is, and they'll select which testlets they're going to administer when throughout the year. And then we lock that into their testing program ready to go in September. So they're building their state test at that local level based on what their curriculum is. I'll say one thing that's driving that we're seeing in Montana is it's driving conversations on the intersection or coherence between curriculum and assessment, which districts haven't typically done. And that's leading toward professional learning around, am I ready to teach those standards at this point in the year? So that's some of the implications that we're seeing in actual practice.
Now, I mean, some of the folks, who are watching probably remember when we had the three-course assessment conversation during Common Core, because one of the concerns was, does this get in the way of how schools are going to teach math or English language arts because they have to map it onto the assessment schedule?
Right.
Any,
We turn that on its head. So we map the assessment schedule to what they plan to teach according to their curriculum. No state is going to adopt a statewide assessment schedule at this grain size. These three standards have to be taught on December 14th. That's not going to happen. But if we let the district testing and curriculum directors decide when they're going to teach those and then when they're going to test them, that really turns that whole problem on its head.
Joel, so what does it look like? New classrooms. You guys have been doing this for 16 years now, if I have the math right. What's it look like when rubber meets road? So, like, what does that look like, and what kind of results are you guys seeing? Oh, mute, unmute, bud.
Sorry. There was a study done a few years ago of students who were in our program, and found that over 3 years, kids grew 20 percentile points from entering sixth to exiting eighth, which we were thrilled with. But there were a set of schools that grew almost 40 percentile points, and a set that grew much less, and a big gap in the middle. And the difference between the ones that crushed it and the ones that okay but not as great was the underlying education policy. You probably didn't expect me to say that, Rick, but let me explain what was happening. We go in and we would say, all right, you're in seventh grade. We're going to figure out what gaps you have from sixth grade, fifth grade, fourth grade, all the way down to the second grade. That was your roadmap. Some schools said, hallelujah, thank God, please meet every student where they are and give them a path to where they need to be. But other schools said, look, my kids are taking that seventh grade high stakes assessment at the end of the year. And every day you spend focusing on a sixth grade, fifth grade, or fourth grade skill is one less day you have to cover all of the grade level. So can you please put a floor in? Don't go more than 1 year below so we can optimize exposure to grade level material. those that put the floor in were the ones that didn't do as well. Those that actually let us meet kids where they were and gave them a path to where they need to be did much better. So the resistance that we sometimes get is either based on policy, federal policy, I need to teach the grade level and only the grade level, or the definition now of high quality instruction materials is largely only teach the grade level. But it's also sometimes mindset. I'm the 7th grade teacher. My job is to only teach the 7th grade stuff to all of my 7th grade students with, as Larry mentioned, my 7th grade textbook. And so really trying to get people to think differently about their role, as Brent would say, and about the student experience is really where the rubber meets the road in this type of work.
And if folks who haven't seen a new classroom kind of model, does it look kind of the same way Brent described kind of the new teacher workforce? Group of 5th grade teachers working together with multiple modalities, or what's it look like? How does it work?
So it originally did, and that's where Brent and I got to know each other, was one space, lots of stations, maybe 100 kids in the room, all going to different stations every day and are using data to figure out what skill they should work on tomorrow based on what they learned as of today. During the pandemic, that program was also known as a super spreader event because no one wanted to put 100 kids in a room and have them regroup every day. So it was then that we pivoted to create a supplemental version of the program called Roadmaps. And right now we're running Roadmaps in about 100 schools around the country. It's a tier 2 supplemental program that is mostly digital with some collaborative modalities. We hope and expect to get back that original program sometime over the next few years.
That's great. Brent, so you talked a little bit about what this looks like. Can you talk a bit about how has it been received by principals? How does it kind of, work when rubber meets road with the community?
Yeah, I mean, and Joel, I'm excited to dig in here in a sec. Right, like it turns out that this is it's an affront to the grammar of school. I mean, we've been doing schooling in a particular way for a really long time, and so the moment that you're like, wait, like I'm a 3rd grader, and now you're telling me that I got 4 teachers, like you're a parent, that just seems real weird. Except for the moment that you get past like, oh, this is different, but to wait, like now I've got 4 different people to better meet the needs of my kid. Like suddenly that actually starts to change the conversation. Almost always the way that we start this work. So we at ASU, I mean, we're weird, right? Like we're basically a nonprofit sitting within a college of education. And so the work that we do is partner with school systems across the country. Arm in arm, we design and build a model that makes sense in your context. And we usually give this advice: start small. And so rather than flipping your entire middle school, just start with 6th grade. And so you build a team-based model in 6th grade. And what ends up happening is that the teachers in 7th grade and 8th grade are kind of peeking around the corner. And they're like, wait, what's going on? Oh, you could go to the bathroom when you want? Oh, that's super. Yeah, right. And so all of us, you're getting different results with your kids. And so what starts small often spreads, and it spreads for 2 reasons. One, the idea of team-based approach spreads because one, the teachers are talking to each other and they're like, oh, this is way better. What we're finding in terms of the outcomes, teacher retention's up, effectiveness of teachers is up. I mean, we're seeing things like, plus 13 percentage point increases in 1st and 2nd year teacher retention in these models. Because, right, you can imagine joining the profession as a member of a team as opposed to solo, and suddenly you feel a lot more supported in every aspect of the job. And families are talking, right? And they're like, wait, like my 6th grader get this, but my 7th grader doesn't? Like, wait. Can we make, because my kid's excited about school. They feel seen. Like some of what Arthur's talking about a broader set of student outcomes, right? We love math, we love reading. Let's keep doing those things. And, right, sense of belonging, or like I feel like somebody at the school cares about me, right? Or that the learning that we're doing is more interdisciplinary and connected. That's why I'm excited about Arthur's stuff, right? It's like, yeah, like one of the things that's a challenge is, there's a lot of normative structures that are not supporting this. So kids are learning more, teachers are feeling more supported, and it turns out that good ideas spread.
And so, Brent, what's one obstacle that you guys have encountered?
Oh my God! If you would have asked me at the beginning of this work, like 5-6 years ago, hey Brent, top answer on the board for why this would be really hard, I would have been like, yeah, it's definitely going to be teacher certification requirements, policy requirements. the unions, right? Like this was my naivete. Unions are very supportive of this work. I mean, like it turns out that it's good for teachers, it's good for kids. Clearly, things we have to talk about. The top answer on the board now is like all of the underlying. Larry's gonna be like, yeah, duh. Like all of the underlying administrative architecture, software. Like taking attendance. If you're a one teacher, one classroom, super easy, right? You're like, there's 25 kids in my room, and there's like 3 people missing. Cool. Like I know how to submit that attendance. It goes into the Synergy student information system, which goes to the state. It's reported. Everyone's happy. But now, if you got 100 kids that could be in any of 4 classrooms, right, at any time, suddenly this very, very easy thing, taking attendance, is suddenly a lot more complicated, right? And then like you get enough of those, like, death by 1,000 cuts, and suddenly you're like, screw it, it's too hard.
I want to open it up for questions from the audience, about 5, but Larry, I want to go to you. New textbooks, the kind of this rethinking, rubber meets road. Like, what does it look like? Received? How do teachers wrestle with this? Who supports them? How do families deal with this?
So when it's done right, which means that this is a school district where a group of teachers have piloted it for a couple months, have let the publisher support them in succeeding it, those teachers sit down with the rest of the teachers and say, we chose this. It wasn't duress. It wasn't a top down. This was, and that's one of the fascinating things about textbooks is all the other buying is done by central offices. The textbook is the one place that's somewhat democratic. In almost every district, a committee of teachers makes the decision. And I think it has to be that way because you can force a supplemental intervention. You can force an assessment on a school district, but what teachers do all day, there has to be a sense of like, I had a say in that. And so historically teachers have had that one place where they have the purse strings. They have to make a recommendation, the administration has to buy it, but it's their decision. And so it's all important that teachers have that great experience. They say to their peers, here's why we chose it. And then the way that you roll it out is not just about here's what are on the pages of the books, but here's the kind of experience your class can have. And I think for us, what we've learned is you got to deliver on 2 things. You got to save teachers time in the prepping and delivery of the class so that some of the things Brent was describing, the attendance taking, just the logistics, the giving homework back, make that stuff easier. The other piece is you've got to have a kind of engaged delight from the kids. So one of our favorite things to do when trying to explain what this is we set up one of the activities. The kids are trying to solve for how to keep their turtle alive as it crosses the beach and the sea snakes are coming. And turns out they have to draw just the right distance over time function to do that. But they haven't even been taught what a distance over time function is yet. They've just learned that depending on the line I draw, the snake and the turtle interact differently. And they're solving that problem. There's a lot of energy. And we just say, if you want to understand what this is about, hey, teacher, use the tool to pause the class to have a discussion. And they hit the button that pauses the class. And all at once, all the kids see that their screen is frozen, and their eyes are back up, which is itself a feeling of power. But then the teacher also hears this really loud groan. No, wait, I almost had my turtle in the grass. And we always like to say to the teacher, just to be clear what that is the sound of kids being told that you have paused their math. That's what they're complaining about. And if you get to that point where kids are that excited about doing the subject matter stuff, doing the math, doing the ELA, and you've made life a little bit easier for teachers, then the challenges of where the rubber meets the road become challenges that a set of professionals want to solve for themselves. They want to learn how to be better at it. They want to learn what all the tools do, but it's an experience they want. It's not a thing that's being forced on them.
One place where one obstacle you guys have encountered, Larry, you already alluded to kind of procurement. Is that the big one?
Yeah, I would say that the other one is just the problem of instructional incoherence. And this is, Arthur's work and Joel's work, and it sounds like Brent's work too, are all looking at this. So what happens is we show up with a curriculum that is really designed to get that engagement and get kids learning. And then someone else shows up with an assessment that has to be given 4 times a year. And it says, as much as the kids are having fun with that, they need to be working on main idea problems. And the teachers are like, oh, wait, well, then let me stop everything, download some main idea worksheets from Pinterest and do that for 2 weeks. And suddenly now they're 2 weeks behind in the curriculum. And the signal of like, well, which one am I supposed to do? The assessment people are saying I have to do this. The intervention tool I use say that my kids need that. And I've got a core curriculum that does this other set of things. And as those tools are all becoming smarter, they're all making more recommendations, and teachers are saying, help me out of this mess. And I do think it's creating a world where we need a lot more coherence, that when you can't just drop an assessment in, it's got to be able to do some of the stuff that Arthur described, aligned to the curriculum that is being taught.
That's awesome. All right, we've got a ton of questions coming in. We got about 15 minutes. So each of these questions we could easily do 20 minutes on. So jump in, but let's try to keep the answers more specific or illustrative. First question, big question. How do you differentiate between meaningful innovation and educational faddism and these fleeting trends that come and go? Like, how do people know if you guys actually are working this stuff out or somebody else is actually working it out? Or if, this is one more panel of grifters making a quick buck and selling kind of glib tech nonsense?
It's a fair question. I'll jump in first and just say, I think one of the interesting things about the kinds of products that Arthur and Joel and I are building is they have a really robust paper trail of what's happening, or I should say a digital trail of what's happening. Are the teachers actually using it? That would be the first question to test. Are the students putting in time? Are students putting in time learning things that weren't even assigned to them? That would be something I would really look for the measure of engagement. And then just how are proficiency rates going? Are kids growing faster in these curricula? So I do think historically there have been a lot of tech gizmos that you couldn't hold accountable because they weren't measuring anything. I think increasingly the tools that schools will care about have built-in measurement that hold the tool itself accountable.
Other thoughts? How do we tell, meaningful improvement versus kind of fleeting innovation fads?
I mean, what I would say is, the stuff that we're doing passes the when I put my own kids in it test, which I think is important. But right, like this is team teaching circa 1964. This is next education workforce circa like whatever, a year ago, 2 years ago. So the point is like, hey, this seems like we've been here before, so why would it be different this time? Which I think is a very fair question. And but I think the world is different. I think that people are craving, educators in particular are craving a different way of operating. And I think that when we look at the results, they're helpful. But the thing that's most compelling to me, we host these site visits. We invite people from around the world. Anyone that wants to come out to Arizona and just tour some of the schools. And if you walk away and you're like, yeah, that seems like a bunch of nothing, then you got your answer. Almost to a person, what we find is like, oh, shit, like, this seems like a better way of doing things.
Question. With all of the phones and screens, we're deeply concerned about attention spans. When we're looking at the kinds of shifts that you guys are talking about, it can feel like we're moving even more online. How do we wrestle with that? How do we make sure this is helping, not hurting kids?
I'll jump in on that one. Reinforcing that trend or responding to it, our tests are 22 to 25 minutes. And the feedback we get from students is that they prefer a short test on something they just learned recently, that it reduces stress, 40 percentage points in our surveys of students, it reduces stress dramatically, and that they learn better when they take a short test on something they've learned recently by 50 percentage points. So students are finding this a much better fit for learning. It is shorter cycle, but it is fitting, I think, the kind of students who our classroom teachers are encountering in their classroom much better way.
And I would I just add to that learning on a screen is one way. It is not the best way, but it's not the only. It's just one way kids can learn. And it's part of the tools in the toolbox. It should be part of the experience, either front facing or behind the scenes. But the alternative is, if we just want a pure analog experience and you're the kid sitting in the back of the room and the teacher's teaching the Pythagorean theorem and you don't know how to classify triangles and you don't know how to use exponents, that's not going to be a successful experience either. So I think the real challenge in sort of the future of the classroom, the future of math in particular, is asking how can we balance these different modalities to get the best of what they can provide to each student.
And I would just add that we've learned over time that even though we sometimes like our digital lesson quite a bit, it's important to have a parallel print one that we work on making as good as possible. And it's also important to sometimes say, please, on this case, don't teach the digital lesson. The hands-on analog one involves cutting things out of paper and fitting them together, and don't miss the opportunity to have a class making that noise and doing those things. And that it's also developmental. In K2, the preponderance of our lessons are hands-on and in the classroom and not in screens. But by the time kids are doing middle school and high school work, the very tools that are going to be on their state assessment are digital. The ones that are going to be in their workplace are digital. And it is possible, and this is an assertion we should do another webinar about, to design technologies of attention in all the same way that the social media industry has built technologies of distraction. There are tools that help kids concentrate, help sustain their focus on something, or at least get out of the way so that they can pay attention to something.
I think people will be super interested in that. We should totally kind of take that up. Joel, question. Do you see more resistance to the kinds of changes you're talking about in secondary math education or elementary math education?
We're right now just focused on most of our schools are sixth grade through Algebra 1, so we're not as much in elementary. It's a little bit easier in middle and high school because there's a defined math teacher and there's defined time blocks for math, where in some elementary schools, the math blocks can be fluid, different teachers can do it in different ways. So I wouldn't say we see resistance in one versus the other, just more of our experiences with kids who are a little bit older.
How are changes in the larger environment? So let's see, the end of ESSER funding, disruptions, obviously, at the federal level, plunging NAEP scores. In what ways are they making the work you guys are doing easier to get traction or harder to get traction?
I would say it's a little bit of both, meaning the impulse to find a solution is strong. People feel like that there is a burning platform for change. And schools have been pitched a whole lot of change tools and suggestions, and it is hard to know which one is the real one. And whenever anxiety about how we're doing combines with uncertainty about what the funding is, there's just a kind of retrenchment to say, like, let's just pay as many teachers as we can, and all the other initiatives we had to rethink schooling.
I would say it's for us, it's been a little bit of both too. But what's also happened is with their ESSER funding, many states and districts purchased high quality instructional materials and have now have a 2 or 3 years worth of data on that and are hearing from their teachers. And the data is showing that as rigorous and coherent as those curricula are, students still have these foundational learning gaps that are making it harder for them to access those materials. And so now many schools, far more than we've seen even 5 years ago, are looking for tier 2 materials that can actually integrate and support learning to complement those HQAM.
Now, when you guys, Larry, you just kind of mentioned, well, let me put it this way. Well, when you guys are going in and pitching superintendents or school boards or individual principals on kind of the value proposition, or Arthur, when you're talking to states about their assessment system, like Larry said, these guys have been pitched a lot of stuff over a lot of years. How do you or other folks who are trying to make the case of what you're doing really adds value, how do you try to break through the noise?
The The main one for us, which is just again newly possible in software, is you put a lot of great stuff out there for free so that teachers, it's not your whole product, but so teachers can find it, can use it, there can be word of mouth about it. They can, so that by the time you show up in the district, you're not saying, hi, let me tell you about this new thing. You're saying, do you mind if I bring two teachers with me who've been using our, and let them do the talking? And whenever you can do a presentation like that, you're in a much better place than when you're a vendor selling stuff. If it can be teachers from their district who are making the case.
Brent, I mean, I assume that model doesn't work the same way for you. How do you guys try to deal with this?
I mean, we use a bit of that, but what I would say is, you know, some of this is like innovative idea. I don't know, Joel, if this was true for you back, you know, when you're doing the same thing, but like people have to hear about this like eight, 9 times, right, from 8 or 9 different people. And the moment that starts, that like part of the reason I'm here, right? Like this is maybe time number 3 for somebody, and you hear about a good idea enough times, and suddenly it breaks through. That's part 1. Part 2 is like, just how do you make this thing actually concrete? I'm like, Brent, I just was with you for an hour. I still don't know what the hell you're talking about. Like, come and see it in action. And we've created these virtual site visits. We've got these live site visits. And the moment that you lay eyes on it, the epiphanies that people have, superintendents, like, I've been doing this for 3 years, but I still didn't. And then I came out and I saw it and I'm like, oh, now I get it.
How do you respond to concerns that this emphasis on data-driven, personalized instruction is going to lose some of the social interactions and human connection that make learning successful for kids?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that one because I think there's sometimes a misconception that personalized means by oneself. What's happening in many of our classrooms is the teacher can look at the data and see, wow, these 5 kids are all working on trinomials today. I'm going to pull them together. We're going to do a collaborative activity on trinomials. We're going to do a peer-to-peer activity in trinomials. So they're always looking to group students who have a common need and then do other modalities, peer-to-peer lessons, collaborative lessons, live teacher-led lessons. So again, the key is using multiple modalities, not just focusing on one.
And imagine
how does
if you
that
had 8
change?
teachers.
Oh, Brent, go ahead.
I was just going to say, imagine if you had 8 teachers in the mix and not 1, right? Like,
Sure.
But how does this affect the relationship between student and kid? Because, you know, you go in, you've got that teacher all year, that student has that predictability. How does this alter that? What do you get if you lose that?
I mean, we've got to center that. I mean, that's like one of the top things that, you know, families are looking for is like, I need to make sure that my kid feels known by name, served by strength and need, right? Like this is the Mesa Public School promise, which resonates deeply with me. And so you're finding that even if you've got 4 teachers, like you're breaking it down, and you start with a homeroom or something, and then you're like off to some other intentional grouping. But every kid's got to be known by name and served by strength and need.
But if you have that home room, but then you're still kind of rotating the rest of the day, you know, you might be picking up in terms of instructional kind of support, but are you losing something in terms of that kid and that teacher just interacting on a sustained basis?
No, you're gaining something.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, here you go.
You're gay. I mean, it's great if you love your math teacher, but if you only have one math teacher and you're not clicking with that, you're kind of hosed for the whole year. Having multiple adults in the room increases the chances that you'll have that connection that we're all looking to have.
And the other thing that I would say there is, you know, you wrote about it in some of your chapters, having time for teachers to actually spend, to internalize their curriculum and to think about what's going on. That's the number one thing that we have to solve for in your master schedules or whatever, is making sure that the teachers that share the kids have time together. And then you're putting kids at the center and building a team around them, as opposed to putting your content at the center and then yapping as a bunch of teachers about the content or about 3rd grade. Like, that's important, and we should have some time for teachers to do that. But when you put the kids at the center and build the team around the kids, it turns out that educators talk to each other, and then the kid is more likely to be seen and known.
Right. Last question. We're just about at time. If each of you guys can do kind of just 30 seconds, great closing question. If we get this right, what do you hope teaching, learning, and assessment look like a decade out? Let's just pick one change. What's one thing that you would like to see working better 10 years out? Arthur?
I would say, Rick, I think we've all been talking about improving coherence at the instructional core. So the connection between content, tasks, and student and the teacher instruction. We're all focusing on improving that coherence in different ways, in different complementary ways. But Dick Elmore's model is still viable. And that's why I don't think these are fads, because we're sticking to the instructional core and we're just trying to improve it and make that data come in at the right point, in the right point in the curriculum, usable by the teacher in a way that's effective for supporting student learning. So just like to see continued incremental improvement on enhancing that instructional core.
That's great. Joel, 10 years out?
I think we're talking about high quality instructional experiences. I think we're going to have ways in which the student experience is designed in a meaningful and fulfilling role for teachers, and a role for technology, and a role for families, but not something that the entire teacher has to take the burden of designing on his or her back. What students experience in school is going to be a reflection of thoughtful decisions on what is best for each one of them.
Brent?
People are running into the profession as opposed to from it, because it's a job that people will love to do, and that we have right-sized and scoped a whole set of educator, not teacher, educator roles that allow us to right-size our education workforce with the realities of the people that want to do the work. We stop boxing the public out of public education, and there are ways for people to contribute meaningfully in the teaching and learning that right now we do a good job of keeping the public out of public education.
And Larry?
I think for me, it would be that the materials that teachers teach with and their practice at teaching with those materials are getting slightly better every year. Right now, we have a world where they try something, they throw it all out, whole new set of materials, whole new set of practices, in many cases, a whole new set of teachers for the reasons that Brent described. But what if the profession was a place where people wanted to stay because they felt they were getting better each year, and we were getting better each year? And it could be a small increment better, but if you're giving me a 10-year horizon, that's a pretty big improvement after 10 years.
I like it. I like it. Hey, thank all of you. Again, we've been talking about their contributions from School Rethink 2.0, putting reinvention into practice. One of the things that I really enjoy, and I think you'll find it well worth your time to read Brent and Larry and Joel's and Arthur's contribution and those of their fellow contributors, is that these are people who aren't just dreaming it up. It's easy for people like me to imagine a whole bunch of stuff we could do. What we tried to put the focus on in this volume was people who are actually busy doing it, actually figuring out what happens when rubber meets road, identifying the obstacles in your path. And I think these are the contributions that do help us distinguish what is feel-good faddism from stuff that could actually make a real change in the lives of kids and families and educators. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you guys for being part of this. Look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you.
Thanks all.